Hector looked at Achilles one last time, his eyes filled with serenity. Then in a sudden motion he grasped Achilles' hand and pulled the sharp sword from its sheath. Before Achilles could react, Hector turned the blade and plunged it deep into his own chest. Blood spurted out, staining his bronze armor red, flowing in streams to the dry earth. Hector fell to his knees, his hand still gripping the sword, but he did not cry out or groan. He looked up at Achilles, his eyes dimming but still bright with resolve. "Achilles," Hector whispered, his voice faint but clear. "Let my death bring peace. Thank you for listening." Achilles knelt beside Hector, cradling his dying body. He felt a profound respect for this warrior, a man not only brave in battle, but also compassionate and self-sacrificing. "Hector," he said, his voice choked, "you are a great warrior and a noble man. I will keep my promise to you."
A hero's greatest battle is not against his enemy, but against his own fate. Achilles faced many warriors, but none tested his soul like Hector did. What if the greatest victory wasn't in killing, but in letting go? The death of Hector and Achilles' promise.
Suddenly the tent flap was torn open. A young soldier burst in, his face pale, his eyes wide with horror. He gasped for breath, his hands trembling as he tried to speak.
"Achilles!" he cried, his voice breaking with pain and fear. "Patroclus! Patroclus has fallen! Hector has killed him!"
The sword in Achilles' hand clattered to the ground, the sharp clang echoing in the confined space. He stood up abruptly, his body tense as if a bowstring had been pulled to its limit.
"What did you say?"
His voice was low but carried a terrifying power, like the growl of a wounded beast. The soldier stepped back, frightened by Achilles' blazing eyes, but stammered, "Patroclus! He wore your armor, led the men into battle." Hector struck him down, before the gates of Troy. No more words escaped Achilles' lips. He rushed out of the tent, his powerful legs pounding the earth as if to shatter anything in his path. The Greek soldiers stood still, parting to make way for him. They knew. No one dared to block Achilles now. He ran to where Patroclus' body had been brought back, laid on a white cloth stained red with blood. The crowd was silent, only the wind whistling through the tattered flags. Achilles knelt beside the body of his dearest friend. Patroclus lay there, his face pale but still serene, as if death could not erase the gentle smile he once had for Achilles. Achilles' armor, which Patroclus had worn to fight in his place, was now smeared with blood, a large hole torn through the chest.
Achilles touched Patroclus' cold face, his fingers trembling in disbelief. "Patroclus?" he whispered, his voice breaking. Then, like a dam bursting, he let out a roar of anguish that echoed throughout the camp. "Patroclus!" Tears streamed down his face, once so unyielding. He clutched Patroclus' body tightly, as if trying to transfer his own warmth to awaken his friend. "Why, Patroclus?" he cried, his voice choked with despair. "Why did you go into battle? Why didn't you let me protect you?" But Patroclus did not answer. His silence cut deeper into Achilles' heart, turning his pain into an unquenchable flame of rage. Achilles stood up, his eyes bloodshot, his face contorted with fury. He turned to the crowd of Greek soldiers, his voice thundering like a storm. "Hector! I will kill you! I will make you pay with your life!" No one dared to speak. They saw in Achilles not a man, but the embodiment of destruction. He stormed back to his tent, donned his gleaming armor, took up the spear and shield his mother, the goddess Thetis, had given him. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he charged onto the battlefield, leaving behind the terrified cries of his comrades. Achilles was now a tempest, and Hector would be his sole target. The battlefield before Troy trembled under the roar of the wind and the clash of metal. Greeks and Trojans fought fiercely, blood flowing like rivers, bodies falling like leaves in a storm. But all seemed to fade when Achilles appeared. He plunged into the Trojan ranks like a wild beast, his spear swinging, piercing 3 soldiers in an instant. Blood splattered on his shining armor, but he did not flinch. His shout echoed across the battlefield, drowning out all other sounds. "Hector, come face me!" The Trojans panicked and retreated. None dared stand before Achilles' spear. He cut through the enemy lines like a sharp blade, each step a death sentence. On the walls of Troy, the people looked down in terror, whispering his name like a curse. Achilles. Achilles has come. Amid the chaos, Hector stood firm like a mountain. He wore his bronze armor, gripping his spear tightly, his sharp eyes unwavering. He knew this day would come, the day he would face Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Greeks. As Achilles approached, Hector signaled for the Trojans to fall back. He stepped forward, facing his enemy in the open space, where only the wind blew through the fallen bodies. The two great warriors stood a few paces apart, the air between them thick with tension. Achilles, in his gleaming golden armor and burning eyes, roared, "Hector! You killed Patroclus, my dearest friend! Today you will die by my hand!" His spear was raised high, ready to strike down his foe, but Hector did not move. He raised his hand, signaling Achilles to stop. "Achilles, before we fight, hear me," he said, his voice low but firm, like a man who had accepted his fate. From his belt, he drew a broken arrow, its wooden shaft chipped and feathers tattered. He held it out before Achilles. "Patroclus gave this to me before he fell. He wanted me to give it to you." Achilles looked at the arrow, and for a moment his rage seemed to melt away. He recognized it, a memento from years ago, when he and Patroclus fought side by side in the early days of the war. In one battle, Patroclus had leaped in front of him, using his own body to block an arrow aimed at Achilles. The arrow had broken in two against Patroclus's shield, and he had kept it as a symbol of their unbreakable friendship. "This is that arrow," Achilles whispered, his voice trembling. Hector nodded, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Patroclus gave it to me just before he breathed his last. He said it would remind you of your friendship, and he begged me to use it to stop you from seeking revenge. Patroclus sacrificed himself not for victory, but to end this war, Achilles. He did not want you to kill me, for he believed my death would only prolong the suffering for both sides." Achilles took the arrow from Hector's hand, his fingers shaking as they touched the splintered wood. Memories flooded back like a tide, the days they ran together by the river, their laughter echoing in the wind, the nights they sat by the fire, sharing their fears before each battle. And the moment Patroclus smiled at him, promising they would always be together, in life or death. Tears rolled down Achilles' cheeks, each drop falling to the parched earth of the battlefield. He felt his heart being torn apart, the pain of loss greater than the fire of anger that had once consumed him. "Patroclus," he whispered, his voice choked. He looked up at Hector, his eyes blurred with tears. "For Patroclus, I will not kill you. I will sheathe my sword and honor his final wish." His spear lowered, touching the ground with a soft clink, as if the storm within him had passed. Hector looked at Achilles, his eyes reflecting deep gratitude. He understood that Achilles' forgiveness was a rare gift, a ray of light amid the darkness of war. But in his heart, Hector knew that forgiveness alone could not end the conflict. The Greeks would not stop their assault, and the Trojans would not surrender unless something monumental happened to force both sides to pause. He knew that only his death, the death of Troy's last defender, could shake the hearts of those drunk on blood and offer a chance for peace. Hector stepped closer to Achilles, his voice low but resolute. "Achilles, I thank you for your forgiveness, but I know that only my death can bring peace to Troy and Greece. You do not need to strike me down. Let me end my own life. But before I go, I ask one thing of you." Achilles, confused by Hector's words, looked at him with searching eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice still thick with mixed emotions. Hector smiled sadly, a smile that held both pain and hope. "If Troy falls, and I know that day is not far, save my wife Andromache and my son, Astyanax. Let them live so they may carry a part of me, and let my legacy be not destruction, but hope for a better future." Achilles listened, and in that moment he sensed the nobility in Hector's heart. The man before him was not just a courageous warrior, but also a husband, a father, a man willing to sacrifice everything for those he loved. He nodded, his voice firm. "I promise, Hector. I will keep my word to you." Hector looked at Achilles one last time,
his eyes filled with serenity. Then, in a sudden motion, he grasped Achilles' hand and pulled the sharp sword from its sheath. Before Achilles could react, Hector turned the blade and plunged it deep into his own chest. Blood spurted out, staining his bronze armor red, flowing in streams to the dry earth. Hector fell to his knees, his hand still gripping the sword, but he did not cry out or groan. He looked up at Achilles, his eyes dimming but still bright with resolve. "Achilles," Hector whispered, his voice faint but clear. "Let my death bring peace. Thank you for listening." Achilles knelt beside Hector, cradling his dying body. He felt a profound respect for this warrior, a man not only brave in battle, but also compassionate and self-sacrificing. "Hector," he said, his voice choked, "you are a great warrior and a noble man. I will keep my promise to you." Hector smiled one last time, a serene smile amidst the pain. "Thank you," he whispered, and then his eyes closed, his final breath leaving his body. The battlefield fell silent, only the wind blowing through, carrying Hector's soul to those he loved. He stood up, tied Hector's body to his chariot, and dragged him around the walls of Troy. But this act was not to boast of victory or humiliate his foe. Achilles wanted both the Greeks and the Trojans to see the brutality of war, to see the price they paid for hatred. He hoped that this image would make them stop, think, and seek peace instead of continuing the slaughter. The legacies of Patroclus through friendship and sacrifice, and of Hector through courage and nobility, would be remembered as beacons of light in the darkness of war. And Achilles, though still torn by pain, had begun to understand that true victory lay not in killing, but in keeping promises to those he loved and respected. What would you have done in Achilles' place? Was this true victory or just another tragedy of war? Comment below and let's discuss. And don't forget to follow for more epic mythological stories.